All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're taking a look at a really ambitious project called DeReticular. Now, this isn't just another tech startup. They're what you call a venture studio, and their goal is, well, it's to completely rebuild our physical infrastructure from the ground up. Think energy grids, supply chains, all of it, based on a radical new idea about decentralized trust. So, the whole philosophy behind DeReticular really boils down to this one phrase, the death of the line. The argument they're making is that our entire modern world is built on these long, fragile, centralized lines. Power lines, supply lines, you name it. And they see these as just massive single points of failure that are frankly obsolete. And this is a perfect way to visualize what they're trying to do. Over on the left, you've got the old model, right? That's linear fragility, where just one little break can bring the whole system crashing down. But on the right, that's their vision, spherical resilience. It's a mesh of interconnected, self-sufficient nodes that can keep on running even if huge parts of the network go dark. So let's first really dig into the problem they're trying to solve. Our global infrastructure, everything from the power grid to the internet, it's all built on these brittle, centralized systems, and they're just becoming more and more vulnerable every day. DeReticular wants to replace all of that with something that's built to last. So how do they do it? Well, the brain of this whole new resilient world is a piece of software they call RIOS. That stands for Rural Infrastructure Operating System. You can think of it as an AI-powered conductor for a totally self-sufficient off-grid community or, an industrial site. So how does RIOS actually work? Well, it's basically a local conductor, and it's juggling three crucial things: the flow of electrons for energy, the flow of data for intelligence and communication, and the flow of mobility for logistics. And the key is, it does all of this without ever needing to phone home to a central cloud server. Okay, but wait, this brings up a massive question, right? In a system like this, with no central authority, no Google, no government server to check in with, how in the world can you trust the data? How do you know that the information coming from some sensor or a drone is actually real? And that's the fundamental challenge, what people in this space call the Oracle problem. If a bad actor can just inject false data into the system, fake energy numbers or a cloned vehicle ID, the whole network is compromised. It's the classic garbage in, garbage out nightmare. So DeReticular's solution here is, well, it's pretty profound. Instead of starting with software and passwords, they start with what's called a hardware root of trust. This means that trust isn't based on something you can fake, like a password. It is literally anchored in the physical reality of the machine. The proof of identity comes from actual physics, from the unique, unchangeable properties of the hardware itself. So here's how they pull it off. They have this process they call the automated notary. It's basically 3 steps. First, a sensor reads some real-world data. Second, and this is the magic, RIOS verifies the unclonable physical identity of that sensor by scanning its unique radio signal. And finally, a special security chip cryptographically signs that data, creating a permanent tamper-proof record of what really happened. And the secret sauce that makes all this possible is this amazing tech called radio frequency fingerprinting, or RFF. See, every single electronic device has these tiny microscopic imperfections from manufacturing, and those flaws create a completely unique hum in its radio signal. RIOS can read that hum, which basically gives every single piece of hardware its own unforgeable digital passport. You just can't fake it with software. So what you end up with is this really clear separation of powers, if you will. You've got the machine identity, the notary, which is totally rigid. It's based on physics, and all it does is attest to what happened. And then you have the human identity, the admin, which is more fluid. It's based on reputation, and it attests to intent. All right, so we've got the machines locked down. We can trust them. But what about the people? How do you trust the humans who are supposed to be operating all this stuff, especially when there's no central server to check a username and password? This is where something called the sovereign badge comes in. Now, it's super important to get this. This is not just a picture, not some silly JPEG. It's a special type of NFT that's soulbound. That's just a fancy way of saying it's non-transferable. Once it's issued to you, it is yours forever. It can't be sold or given away, so it acts like a permanent, unforgeable key. So picture this. You complete a training course with the DeReticular Academy, and they issue one of these badges directly to your personal digital wallet. That badge is now your key. So you can walk up to a RIOS node, even one that's completely offline, and just present this badge to prove you have the authority to access it. No central server needed. Okay, so we've got trusted data from machines and trusted credentials for people. But where does all of this information actually go? I mean, how do you store it and verify it if you're not using Amazon or Google's cloud? This is where it gets really clever. They use this dual stack approach with two different versions of a decentralized network called Freenet. Think of Hyphenet, the older version, as a permanent, unchanging library. It's for static stuff, like repair manuals. But the new Freenet is totally different. It acts like a super fast, real-time ledger that's constantly tracking the state of all the machines and contracts right down to the millisecond. All right, so let's put this all together. Let's see how this ledger, combined with that hardware root of trust we talked about, can stop a pretty sophisticated cyber-physical attack right in its tracks. So imagine a hacker shows up in Texas and tries to log in with a cloned device identity. But the real physical device is actually operating in Arizona at that exact moment. The node in Texas just does a quick check on the Freenet ledger, and the ledger says, hey, this device was last seen in Arizona just a few seconds ago. This creates what they call a physics violation. A device just can't travel 2,000 miles in an instant. And boom, the system immediately rejects the clone and flags the attempt as fraudulent. So when you take a step back and look at the whole picture, you can see how all these different layers, the hardware, the software, the human identity, the decentralized network, they all lock together. They're building a foundation for what DeReticular calls a sovereign world. But what does that actually mean in the real world? So let's be real about this. Their biggest strength, for sure, is how they've solved that Oracle problem by tying digital data to real-world physics. It's a huge deal. But they do have challenges. They're relying on some pretty experimental software. The opportunity, though, is absolutely massive. They could become the operating system for this whole new deep-end market. That's decentralized physical infrastructure. But on the other hand, there's always the threat that governments might not be too friendly towards this kind of sovereign technology. Because at the end of the day, this isn't really just about off-grid power. The real goal here is to build a world where the history of something, its provenance, is mathematically provable. A world where you can actually trust the data about where your food came from or whether your energy was really green, all without needing some big company in the middle to vouch for it. And that really leaves us with this one big, powerful question to chew on. Once you figure out how to anchor digital trust directly to physical, verifiable truth, what new systems, what new economies, and what new ways of working together actually become possible?